When I originally offered this to ETNZ, my thoughts were that I would have a bunch of youngsters in here that were not confident in giving a toolbox talk. However, in looking around, I'm pretty sure that you guys don't actually fit that demographic because you're quite happily speaking out. So, the next half of this was meant to be kind of bringing you out of yourselves and letting you bloom as little flowers and go off into the world. And I was just going to do my bit for the next generation. But it's sort of no longer, it's not really relevant, I don't think, to be doing that, because I don't think any of you actually probably have a problem. You have already bloomed while I wasn't watching. Yeah, exactly. When did you guys bloom, for goodness sake? You can't go off blooming by yourself. So we're kind of, I'm a little bit at a loose end here, unless there are other questions and what have you around any of this stuff. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, it doesn't have to always be about communication either.
Yeah, so this is not so much about communication, but more in your role as a health and safety person. How do you feel about the chronic overworking in our industry? And the fact that because people are paying large amounts of money for equipment hire and space hire, they want to do 14-hour days, and you do 2 shows and then a pack out all through the night and shit like that. The events he does where you're there in the morning putting it in, the event's on in the evening, and then you're there all night taking it out. How do we deal with that as an industry?
Yes, very good question. How do I feel about it? I think it's wrong. I think fatigue is one of the biggest risks in our industry. And it's sort of a flow-on thing, and this is well outside the brief of this particular presentation, but anyway, you've opened it. I think I get very concerned for people's welfare and well-being around those sorts of stories, and I think fatigue really does affect people's well-being. I think the fact that we all work in dark places and don't get enough daylight affects our well-being. I think the fact that we, and I say we, I'm probably not actually me personally anymore, but me in the past. But certainly people who are casual in the industry, it's a very casualised workforce. You're only as good as your last job. If you exhaust yourself on that job, you're not necessarily available for the next one because you've burnt yourself out. And too often I see burnout, and it usually ends up with sort of illness, and sometimes it's physical, but more often than not it's sort of mental or emotional wellness. And it doesn't don't need to get all heavy about that. It can be on a sort of milder version or whatever. And I think fatigue and that sort of thing, and the way that we run the industry, definitely needs a jolly good looking at. The casualisation is really, really hard for people. And I really feel for people in Auckland who are paying exorbitant rents for, a tiny little bedroom. Back when I lived there and worked there, and when I was last flatting down here, I wasn't spending half of my wages on a week on rent. So it was okay that I didn't have the work or not have the work. The uncertainty now is just too much pressure for people. Don't know the answer to fixing it. Sorry about that. Other than I think it's industry-wide, and I think it's something that, needs to be looked at. If it's funding, I don't know.
That's definitely an aspect of it, surely. I mean, the reason these days are so long is to save money for whoever is hiring the space, hiring the equipment, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm on an hourly rate and I'm doing a 14-hour day and it's the only day I've got that week, then whoo! But if you're actually in that position where you're being forced to do that time and time again, and I think particularly with touring companies and that sort of thing is when that becomes an ongoing, and you really don't have a way out. You can't just ring in and say, look, I'm not available today or tomorrow or whatever. Or if you're a venue tech and that's your role and you have to do it. It's something that actually, if you're looking at the overall scheme of health and safety and that, it's something that it's the venue's responsibility to look after your well-being as well as your physical safety. And if you're not being safe, then they're not doing their duty of care. And I think it's only a matter of time before some cases are going to come against the people who run the venues.
As a venue, it's your responsibility, right? And so that's our solution for it, is to never book someone for that ridiculously long day, and certainly not to book people for multiple ridiculously long days. But you've got no control over companies coming through your venue and what they're doing. And
No. And they really don't. And if you happen to get them at the end of the tour, God, they're horrible people to be around. Bless them. But, you know, they are, eh? I mean, yeah, everyone's been there. Yeah, but yeah, they are. They're just arseholes. Yeah.
Mental well-being anyway, because if you're all being nasty to each other, then no one's having a nice time. If you're being nasty because of fatigue.
Yeah, absolutely. And fatigue, I mean, it breeds all of that sort of stuff, and it's a hard industry. And then you get, you get the person who says, "I'll toughen up" or whatever, and you kind of going, "I don't want to toughen up. I just want to cry," and then it's. I think it is has been a hard industry. I think we can do better at looking after each other. I don't super have answers. I think there could be stuff that we could introduce that would help look after people's welfare. I think it's something that maybe could come through venues, because they're the ones who certainly touring companies touch base with and that sort of thing. I don't know. In Australia, they've got some really good models, but they also have bigger touring companies that tour for years around the places. We tend to be a lot more self-contained. I know the farmers in New Zealand have a really good scheme called Good Yarn, and they're sort of going, basically they discovered that the farmers were they're not doing so well. Particularly dairy farmers, and a lot of it's actually around the perception people have of dairy farmers. As city folk, we all go, "Oh, dairy farmers are polluting our rivers and blah blah blah," and they're actually a little bit sensitive about that, and they're not doing so well as an industry, and they're very vulnerable. They're very isolated on their farms, and maybe they don't want to talk to their partner about it because it's just too close, and they're the only two people that live within however many miles. So what they did is that they trained up the tanker drivers and the rural bankers and the people that come onto the farms to visit, and kind of, I guess it was mental first aid kind of stuff, to go, "Oh, Trevor's not doing so well, and do you want to have a cuppa?" And they sit down and talk to them, and they actually have had so much success that they credit saving lives through that scheme, because these people aren't trained to be counsellors, but they're trained to just sit and listen. And then they go back through the networks, whatever they are, I can't quite remember that, but they come back and they go, "Trevor's not doing so well, somebody might like to check on Trevor," and then they've actually been able to intervene and get help to these people who are isolated. And I've often wondered whether we can't do something like that via venues or what have you in New Zealand, because they're the ones that you've got your actors coming through, and you've got, your touring company coming through, and they can perhaps have the time to sort of, if we train up our venue techs and what have you, to notice that sort of thing, to even have a way to give somebody a nudge and say, "Hey, something's not up with that person, whether we can't save a few lives." But I'm not quite sure how to do it. Anyone want to help me? I think it'd be awesome.
It really goes down to who's employing who as your starting point.
Mm-hmm.
If you're self-employed, obviously you're your own worst enemy.
Yeah.
You can do it if you want, then the people will pay you for it.
Yeah.
They might get to a certain point. Look, my day is 12 hours. Any time after that, I go for overtime.
But I think a little bit with that is a culture shift, and we still have a culture of making heroics out of long hours and shitty sort of life choices, and so you can. Yeah.
Point where you're knowledgeable enough and skilled enough to be able to make that demand, and you have to be confident enough to do it.
You've got to be old enough and experienced enough. I mean, you see the same mistakes being made by youngsters that I made, and I got burnt out, and I've had times where I've had to leave the industry and recharge.
Level 4, you should be able to do it, and the company should pay you for doing it. Will they pay you for doing it? Will they pay you more because you got your level 4? Or will they just go, "Oh fuck, we'll just get someone else because you're cheaper"? So the industry has to hold itself together, otherwise it's all going to fall over.
But also the culture of the industry. I mean, you know, I only got 3 hours sleep last night. Oh, well, I only got 2. Oh, aren't you a hero for having a worse lifestyle than me? You know, yeah. It is changing. Well, I don't know if it is. I've observed it recently, you know, and it's changing maybe in your sphere of people that have got to your stage. And
we do. We have the account managers sell the event, obviously. They try and put an amount of labour in there, and then it's a case of trying to figure out how many people you need to actually make the show go. So the ops people put in the team that they think is right, which might be twice what has actually been allocated, and then you see the schedule, and it's even worse. So you have to start putting more people in. Because not what they start now doing is it starts at 6 o'clock in the morning, the event finishes at midnight, and then it packs out. So you cannot have your day crew there the whole day, let alone doing the pack out. So you have to get extra crew.
yeah. And then that's crew, and crew will get fatigued, and crew are doing perhaps physically dangerous stuff. But then you've got the people making the decisions, who it's harder to swap out because they are the system tech or whatever, and you don't have 2 system techs on. And
they just have a late start, so they don't go in early in the morning. They might miss the first 2 or 3 hours. They might get in an hour before the show. Oh, we need them there early, so you just have to push back and go, okay, if shit's gone wrong the night before, they may have to come in early. If everything's fine and there's nothing for them to pick up, we're not going to send in 4 people at 6 o'clock in the morning just so they can sit on their ass in case something goes wrong.
But when have you ever done a tour that shit hasn't gone wrong at some point in the tour?
I say we are different on some of them because it's a client-based thing. We control the whole area and all the shit that goes in the room, so you know when shit's going to go. You know when you're behind schedule, put it that way. So we're pushing back that way and saying, okay, 12 hours, 14 hours, you're gone after that period of time. You will not be on site. You leave. You have to go. We'll get an adult, as we call it. The adult comes in and controls the pack out. If it's a big show, you might have 2 adults, one for vision, one for sound, and lighting. And you get more humpers in. You get more Kiwi crew in, or more of our casuals. We've got a lot more casuals on our books now. We don't have to use Kiwi crew. We're just getting this whole collective of casual crew.
Wow. So the cycle has gone back right down to...
Yeah, we've got about 20, 30, maybe 40 of our own casual crew that specialise in various areas. And then on top of that, we'll get the Kiwi crew or Mahi crew, which is another subsiding. So we're knocking back as hard as we can to keep it down.
Yep.
And it seems to be working.
But yeah, I still think, yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
I'll look ahead and I'll see a schedule and go, hey, this one's going to be a shit fight because you know the client, you know the venue, you know they've got breakfast sessions, lunchtime sessions, evening sessions. Following day, same again, a break, turn the room around into the ballroom, into the function at night. So you know it's going to be a heavy one. So, okay, those 4 people on ops, they need a hotel room. And did that on one of them, and there ended up being 6 of them sleeping in the rooms because it's what it turned out. Or they need cabs.
Not on my room,
No. Top of the table. 2 rooms, top of the table.
No, that's great. I mean, it's great to hear that sort of stuff is happening because, I mean, I do think that we still do have a lot of burnout. And a lot of it is yeah, as I say, we work in the dark. We don't get enough actual physical daylight. We get given pizza.
Yeah. I think...
And what the hell is that about? I mean, every time they go, oh, let's feed the crew, we're going to get pizza. Yay, pizza. You know, can I please have a salad? Honestly, I've just had pizza the last 5 days in a row. It's not food. It's kind of bread with sauce and cheese on it. It's not food. Got a thing about pizza. I've just had too much. I've hit my pizza limit for the... lifetime supplies of it. We also don't have work-life balance if we're working the sorts of times that Smiley's talking about. And all of those things catch up with you eventually, that when you do finally get that time off, you don't know what to do with yourself.
Don't have any hobbies, right?
Don't have any hobbies, don't have any friends, you know.
Friends outside the industry at least.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it means that every time you hang out, you talk about work anyway, which is
Yep.
not
Yeah.
what you're supposed to be doing.
And they actually found, studies in Australia found that, especially with people who have been on tour, and actually in the States as well, they were finding, you know, in those sorts of places, they go on tour for a long, long time. It can be years on tour. And they were finding that people, when they came off tour, were grieving because they had sort of lost that bit of their life. It was over, and they were, then they had a sort of period of having to readjust before they either got on to the next tour or whatever. Yeah, I think so, and some of the big shows.
Arts festivals can be a bit like that. I always have a week off after a festival, or if I can.
Yeah, well, you buy into it. So. What were you going to say, Stevie? Did you have a...
I was just going to say it was interesting you touched on that mental health first aid topic just a few minutes ago. Is exactly what was talked about yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, I was aware that they did that, so I thought it was...
And it was really interesting. You brought up exactly the same ideas around some sort of system whereby as a team, your manager or even all together, you just check up on each other. Just a little, are you okay, is everyone okay type chat every now and again, and noticing if somebody's clearly not right and just asking if they need to talk to anyone or anything like that. And I thought it was interesting you just brought that up because it's exactly what was espoused yesterday.
Yeah, oh, okay.
The other thing was somebody in the room intimated that the younger folk coming through are actually really resistant to working those hours and saying, what do you mean you want me to work from 9 a.m. to 11? No thanks, which is good to do that. And that coupled with the older bunch like us who have, and I've had a couple of, I've had a major burnout, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of other people in the room have as well, and a lot of the stuff that was said, sorry, this is
the ones I know, there's at least 3 of us.
And yesterday's room, and everything that Nigel said rang very true and very loudly, I reckon, for probably most people in the room, about the stresses and the overwork and everything that went with it, and the emotional fallout and all that. But so the knowledge that we have of losing that work-life balance and coming out the other side and knowing that we've got to achieve that, coupled with the younger group coming through saying there's no way we're going to go there, perhaps there's hope that somewhere in the middle we're all going to find the right way to go about things. And it's down to, I think, the venues, perhaps, in saying, oh no, we can't actually book that amount of time, or we've got to allow 2 days for this sort of setup, or we've got, maybe it's educating venues
but then it comes
well, I don't want to get all socialist on you, but if we actually had unions and we actually had penal rates, people would look quite closely, I think, at those sorts of things. If we were to go, okay, after 8 hours, we then go to time and a half or whatever, then suddenly they go, oh, hang on a minute, we maybe don't have to do it. Do it that way. And I think maybe it is educating also the production companies and whoever it is that's doing this, whether it's the ballet or the opera or whoever's bringing in these other shows, and actually going, do you guys realise what risks you're putting people under, and are you aware? They possibly don't know, and they should know at board level and what have you, what risks are involved in their industry and how they're being managed. And I could pretty much guarantee that they don't, or they wouldn't be doing that.
Just saying you bring it's all we're all saying, bring back more crew for the pack out, but you actually can't sometimes because they're not there, they don't physically exist, they're all too busy. Or you can't find them because it's like, get out of bed, come back for 1 o'clock pack out for 4 hours.
Yeah, back on that now. That's why I do health and safety. I don't want to do that anymore.
They don't want to do it anymore.
No, why would you? Why would you for whatever, it's not even living wage.
We're trying to get these facts through to the client.
Yeah.
And, do you really need to start that breakfast one way? How have you planned it? Talk about it, think about it. And don't always expect that the show that's going to have more production in it is going to be cheaper than the one you got last year. When you technically want more shit and you want less than what you paid for last year, and we're having to put more money and more time and more people at it to make it happen, to keep it safe.
Yeah.
You can't just...
Well, it is that thing of pushback from the suppliers saying, no, we don't work past midnight, we don't do that. I mean, a lot of venues do have a cut-off point. I mean, I notice, the venues around town here always used to have past midnight, and you're paying quite a lot more, so you make sure that you're not going past midnight unless you absolutely have to. And
when the game finishes, basically as soon as the punters have left the room, you turn everything off and go home. And you come back and you do the pack out on Sunday. It's like, yes! Come back at 9 o'clock on a Sunday, 10 o'clock if you want on a Sunday and do a pack out.
Oh, well, if you're doing an outdoor gig, why do you pack out at night? It's not safe.
It's all corporate shit in the stadium. Oh, yeah.
Cool. All right, anyone else got any other kind of pressure issues that vaguely relate to communication, other than that we're talking?
I think it's a luxury of working at quite a small venue with a small amount of teams, and I've had some experiences, only a couple, with larger groups and lots of people. And I think that it's actually the layers of communication that create some of these issues. You know, when I sit at the Theatre Royal in Nelson and the manager gets an email saying, oh, we want to hire the venue for such and such a show the day after something else, she just turns to me as the person that's going to be the one doing it, says, is that going to work? And I just go, no.
Yeah.
And says, sorry. And then the problem doesn't exist. And you know, and I know that potentially might be turning away money, or we look at ways of changing it, we negotiate with the other people, we go through those processes together. But I have seen some situations where there are so many layers involved from, and this comes back a little bit to what you were saying at Safety by Design lecture about considering the end user.
Yep.
And actually bringing them in and going, how is this going to work, and is it practical?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more you remove those decision making to those upper levels, and you don't have that communication throughout your organisation. I mean, you guys sit next to each other. You know, hey, what? You know, you're small enough that you can actually do that. And as soon as you get to an email or anything else, and it's sort of then, and you've got the relationship with that person, and it could be that person leaves, and you get another person who doesn't communicate like that, and then it's all, you know. Hopefully it won't ever happen, but that's exactly the point, is that you as the person who knows what it's like to try and achieve that, you know, that goal, we can just go, no, that's just silly, we don't work like that here anymore. And being able to do that through your silos, but also being able to get that message across at those different levels as well.
Because we operate at a small level, I can't appreciate the kind of stresses and the pressures that come from a large production that has so many moving parts. So that the sort of thing you were just explaining about before is almost scary to me.
Different kind of stress though, because with a small outfit, if you run your outfit with 3 people, and then all of a sudden one of them's not available, that's a massive change in your capability
of your workforce.
Yeah. Whereas in a bigger outfit, you know how it is when you call a crew of 12 and one doesn't turn up, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But if you're only expecting 2 people to turn up and only one does, then
That's right.
you know.
I mean, yeah, there is, as I said before, there is the crew fatigue, and we were chatting earlier about how do you know when when you are subcontracting the labour, that the people are coming in fresh in the morning, and they haven't just come off an overnight loadout or whatever, and that was always historically a tricky thing, and that's part of, Zeb was saying, that check-in in the morning of going, okay, how's everyone doing? Is there anybody who would like to be on light duties? And sort of almost doing an amnesty, kind of going, look, I'm not going to judge you for why, necessarily, but, you know, if anyone's feeling not, I sort of term it, not 100% for any reason, you know, and it might be I'm not 100% because my cat just died, or I might be not 100% because I probably had a few too many beersies out the night before, or whatever, but I shouldn't be working up high. You know, you can just quietly have a word and just be going, okay, lighter duties for you today, and maybe you get knocked off earlier, without you losing your livelihood for it. You know, and I mean, we can't carry people forever, and people have responsibilities. But you're sure as hell going to hide that sort of stuff if you think if the only shift you've got that week is going to be taken away from you, and you're not going to be able to pay your rent. So there's going to need to be a little bit of compassion around that sort of stuff as well. But then there's also that level of as I was saying, that the crewing level, and the you know, you may only get 11 crew out of the 12, but there's definitely going to be one person leading that crew who's potentially the person on tour, potentially the one that's, and they're the ones that are getting quite burnt out, I think. Yeah, it's educating them that it's okay to take a break as well, it's okay to, and that sort of thing, and getting rid of the culture that has existed in the past, and hopefully it is changing, of that harden up. And a slight meanness. I always, in the past, have found the industry to be quite a little bit mean at times, and really pick on people's vulnerabilities, and a little bit too get on a roll here, a little bit closed in New Zealand of like, there's not that many of us, and if we've found our niche, we want to hang on to it really tightly and not so giving, because we're scared someone else is going to take our job. So all of those things contribute to the hero mentality, and then the flow-on effects of that. Again, don't even think about doing safety, you guys. I'll have you. Oh, anything else?
Lots to add to that, but
Yeah, go on.
I'm always cautious of.
Just do a little bit of it.
I know, there's coming from a venue point of view and all that kind of stuff. It's always easy, or what I hear a lot these days is like, oh, it's the venue's responsibility, and I would agree, but I would also argue that. We've got this thing at work where we say everybody's a leader, and when it comes to health and safety, everybody's responsible on one side, without sitting on a high horse and saying, you know, this is all not happening. I know it's happening, long hours in certain areas. As far as we as a venue operator goes, I'm glad enough or fortunate enough that our upper management in the organization, they actually listened, like 2015 when we had a situation where we experienced like a really excessive workload due to event relocations and whatnot. And we had staff working 18-hour days, 3 times a week, like the good old days in the theater where that used to be the norm. And they actually said, well, this is not really, you know, I'm starting to stress out, I'm being fatigued, we're having people rigging at, you know, like on various hours of the day, and they started to, they felt unsafe, and they started to feel affected by it, and they sang out. So we actually went ahead and looked at our hours of operations and how we can structure that differently, which cost a lot of money as far as hiring extra staff and making sure we have, you know, enough breaks. And we came up with these our own guidelines of managing hours of work, which we shared with the ETNZ.
Yeah, you did.
So that stuff's readily available. And we shared that across other suppliers as well that we would see in our venues and on. So kind of this is what we're working towards. And I think there's has generally been a shift in mindset. I guess that's the other key word these days. That is actually not okay. You know, it is actually, I hear that from promoters, I hear that from operators, like, you know, you guys saying, like, actually, no, you can't drive the truck overnight from Auckland to Wellington after we've done a 15-hour day. You need to book another day in between. So these things happen, and that's not my responsibility as a venue person to tell the client that comes in that day and double check, hey, how is your routing? You know, oh, no, actually you shouldn't be. We can only take responsibility for the bookings that we are receiving, making sure that our staff are able to deliver these events at these schedules at a safe level. We can double check that the casual crew that we're supplying our client or that production company with had enough breaks as far as we are aware of. But there's also a part of self-responsibility on their behalf that we need to rely on.
Yeah.
I'll come to that later. But then there's also stuff that I notice. I mean, nobody can say that that whole fatigue and hours of work is a surprise anymore. Bullshit. It's been discussed for 4 or 5 years now, and it is apparent to me that it's always the same operators that are the ones that come in guns blazing, rock and roll style, and booking their tours the way they're booking their tours, being supported by their suppliers that they have been working with for the last 10, 15 years. And it's same old, same story.
Yeah, it's surprising actually that rock and roll still exists.
And that still happens.
Yeah. So
I guess
are you saying that, you know, like maybe suppliers have a responsibility to push back and say no, we're not, you know, we.
Aspects they have, maybe also their staff that are there booking freelance staff. And I'm not sitting on this high horse and saying, well, just tell the company that wants to hire you for the next 3 weeks to tell them to fuck off because they're not going to allow you for the breaks. But maybe start having the conversation consistently, saying you got to do something about this because eventually people will not take these jobs anymore, or people will fall over and say, actually, I've got to go home. Sorry, I'm done. 2 weeks into the tour, find somebody else.
Well, I think that's what Stevie was saying, is that hopefully the younger generation are doing that and not thinking, oh, that's the last time I'm ever going to work in this industry again. I mean, the times that I've burnt out, I've actually had this thought that I may never work in this industry again because I've left somebody in the lurch, you know, and you know and the self-confidence. You know, the drop in self-confidence that comes with that, and the whole, you know, downward spiral. You know, and I can see how people have in our industry got to darker places than I managed to, because it's you give so much of your life to it. You give all of these hours. You don't have any friends outside of the industry. They are your family, and then suddenly one day you've had enough and you walk out on them, and you know, where does that put you? Makes people very, very vulnerable. Yeah, I completely hear what you're saying, but I think it's at the levels and it's the conversations, you know, what JR was saying before, that he actually has a relationship with the person who makes the bookings, and you can say, well, no, that's not realistic or whatever. And perhaps the same thing happens on tours, you know, that's before the tour's booked. I mean, I know the company that I'm with is, again, very, very small when I'm doing theatre work, and they say, is this realistic? Can we actually achieve this? And you know, can you look at the schedule and tell us if that's realistic? And you go, no, we need a break, we need a day off there, we need this or that. So yeah. A day off that isn't a travel day, yeah, definitely.
Promoter, venue, supplier thing, because the promoter comes up with this grand plan to get this product all around the country, and then they're hiring people that have to achieve that, whether it be the suppliers or whatever, and they're going to venues, you know, and if someone has to work out that the same people are actually doing that work all the way around the place, and where are the gaps to make them live and breathe and safely achieve what they need to achieve. And you know, if you've got a really big gala dinner going into a venue, you know, it's not really realistic to get it all done in the day, because at some point that'll mean they're setting the tables and chairs while you're still doing the focus.
Yeah, exactly. That's,
you know, so
yeah.
it comes right back to that, in that, you know, if you only have the venue from 6 a.m, then, you know, can you if you sit down as a group of the suppliers on that job, can you actually achieve those things in that time? And
I think some of that's the education side of it, though, because I mean, I don't know if you're in the session that I did yesterday, but the sort of surprise on people's faces when I challenged the fact that it's not a good idea to rig above people who are working below, you know, and then it was the pushback was, well, that will push out these things a lot further. And this is people in the room who have been on the receiving end when I asked people to put their hand in the air of who has been at, you know, had a near miss, who has been nearly hit by something, and there was a hell of a lot of people who had. Yeah, exactly, me. I mean, yeah, exactly. And you know, thankfully they didn't hit us, but it's only just by luck. Yet the people who are making those decisions to book their gala dinner and have all of that happen all the way through aren't people who have had things dropping close to them. They're not aware of the hazards.
Group are required to make that decision, because the venue themselves don't know if this is a production dinner or it's just tables and chairs and food.
Yeah.
You know, and they need to know that this gig is one of those ones.
Yeah.
That's more than just a day's gig, and that steps
So it's
out.
educating the event managers, really, isn't it? It's sort of going to them and saying, do you realise what the risks are for the end users?
Understand the difference between a simple gig and a production gig, but also they have to be told that this is a production gig, and someone needs to, you know, be able to help them say, you really can't just book this for the day. You know, and if the 2 days are not available, then maybe we have to do it somewhere else or some other time, because it can't actually work.
But the venue rules won't happen.
What's that?
It won't happen.
Well, but that's the challenge. That's where we find
Well,
ourselves
it's not
squeezed.
realistic.
You know,
You just-
Sven, I assume
space.
that's a thing that happens with you all the time. You know, about
Oh,
you know, the
big
client
time, yeah.
just wants to pay for the 1 day, but really it's a 2-day gig.
Well, luckily enough, yes, that happens, rarely. I mean, we're in a sort of in an interesting situation with where we work, and because we have us in my technical service team as the in-house resource and the in-house supplier in an arena conference whatnot setup, right?
Yeah.
That's quite unheard of for the rest of New Zealand, where we're actually not contracted by the venue, we're actually part of the venue, right? So I am in the lucky position where our event bookers come to me and go like, well, we've got netball on Tuesday, can we put in the NZSO on Thursday? And I'm like, Wednesday, Thursday? No, Friday, yes. Okay, sweet. And they go back to their table and they go back to the booker and it's like, oh, this is what we can do. And that happens. And we're having these conversations between the ops team that do all the floors and the tables and whatnot, and the riggers and us, and then the event coordinators, and we look at the hours of work and what else is involved. And we usually try to work out something, or every once in a while we say no. And when we say no, then they understand, well, I guess that's a no. And they won't challenge us. Or I don't have the general manager all of a sudden come to me and say, well, I know you said no, but can you? And say, no, we can't, for these reasons. Because you're going to be the next one coming to me when I tell you our crew worked 18-hour days. You're going to look at me and say, how do you work 18-hour days? You're not supposed to work 18-hour days. I know, but that's just what happened, and that's how the cookie crumbles. And then they're going to leave us alone. But we're also having the conversation with large gala dinner events where we're sitting there with the caterer and the coordinator and the booker and the client and us and the audio-video supplier and saying, what are we trying to achieve here? And no, you need to schedule your pack-ins differently, and this is not going to happen on that time. This needs to happen then and there. And there's always the toing and froing, and there's a bit of pushback and whatnot. But it's also a part of educating the clients going forward that they probably need to book 4 or 5 days instead of just 3 days.
Yeah.
And understanding that the business development team understand that as well and raise that with the client early in the game. And that happens, but I understand that is not the norm, how we operate. But
my point is that the problem happens on the day. The problem that the focus is happening at the same time as the tables, that's happening, but that problem wasn't created that day.
yeah.
No.
The schedule was wrong from the time it was booked. That meant that had to happen like that. So
And I think
communication, the right people
that's
need
sort
to be
of
in the circle right at the beginning.
links into the safety and design.
And the fact that the design of the event, you know, and the
It's being
scheduling
accompanied.
design is not allowing, you know, that sort of time. And it's because the people don't understand, you know, it's taken, you know, a long time to understand what the needs of the caterers are. I have to ask them every time because I've never been a caterer. I don't know, you know, and I think that they can just magic tables up like that. Apparently not, you know. But you have to have the time to go and actually ask and say, okay, so and what are the risks involved for you, and how long does that take, and then actually really schedule it out and really truly, you know, having the production managers over the top that really understand that and schedule properly. And it is all about good scheduling for that. That eliminates the working above others and all of that sort of stuff. And then communicating those schedules out there so that everyone understands that when we say your time to be in the venue is this time, it doesn't mean half an hour later or an hour earlier. It's the reason we have you in at this time is you don't drift in your own good time. Thank you, supplier. Thank you, audio. Or marquees, in my humble experience. But, you know, there's a reason for it. And that's all part of this. This is tying in nicely, guys. We're going to finish on a communication there. This is all part of that overlapping duties thing, you know, where you have to consult and communicate, and it all kind of ties in together. And the more that we can communicate, rather than just show frustration when it's going wrong, but actually look towards educating people to what the issues are and why we need things to be the way that they are.
Event organisers that everybody these magical schedules and these magical events that they want to happen and put into this room that are going to entertain these people for 12 hours and takes about 3 days to set up, and they want to do it in 24.
I quite like trying to communicate it with this is how much it's costing because you've done it like this. So a venue overrun fee of over 12 hours in the venue for a day costs, and having crew on past 2 a.m. we pay them extra, so the client has to pay them extra too.
Yeah, I think having them with penal rates is actually a really good idea. You know, it really is. I mean, and I know was always pushback on that when we tried to get penal rates way back in the way days when I worked at the HASANZ Centre, which was a long time ago. And we would say, it was crazy. After 15 hours, can we have an extra $1 an hour? No. And it's like, but, you know, and it's like, well, you're just going to pass it on to the client, you know, like we just want to have a slight penal thing that they then think twice before they do that.
Everyone understands money.
Everybody does understand money, and it's, I don't know, there's probably quite a lot of education that needs to happen to that sector. That's, you know, and that they don't get it, they don't understand it at all. And it's, again, I don't know whose job that is. ETNZ, the new exec, maybe. Or, you know, it's just talking it through. Maybe it's at the supplier level where you're engaged. I mean, I know the event company I do a lot of work with has a very strong relationships with their suppliers, and maybe they sit down and have you know, meetings every half a year or quarter and go, hey, this and this isn't working for us, you know, for these reasons, or are you aware of these issues? Those sorts of relationship building things as well. It's just a suggestion. Anything else that anybody's got? Feed into it. Cool. Thanks for coming up with something so that I can get my bottle of wine. We did it as a team.
Thank you so much. It's another wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Sorry it was looser than the others, but
Good. I'm sure everyone really enjoyed it. And,
Yeah.
yeah.